The Beat of MK, this is MKFM. Welcome to the Civic offices at Milton Keynes Council for our first election debate for Milton Keynes North. We'll be on there for the next 2 hours till 9 o'clock, finding out about the issues that matter to you. Tonight we're joined by 6 parties. If you'd like to get involved with the debate tonight, you can tweet us at MKFM. Just put the hashtag MK election. We've got a big screen here at the Civic office, and we'll be able to see all your tweets tonight. We're doing this in association with MK News. They're going to be tweeted as well tonight, so check them out on Twitter. So let's find out who we're joined by tonight. So we've got 6 candidates, all wanting to become the MP for Milton Keynes North. So standing for the Lib Dems tonight is Sam Crooks. So Sam, if you'd like to introduce yourself, tell us what party you're from, and also where you live in Milton Keynes.
I'm not actually standing as such, Darren. I'm representing the Lib Dems tonight because Paul Graham, our candidate, unfortunately is engaged in a function in Buckingham. I myself live in Greater London. Okay, that's great. Thank you, Sam. Hello, Mark.
Good evening.
So, same for you, please.
I'm Mark Lancaster. I'm the Conservative candidate. It's been an honour and privilege to be a member of Parliament for the last 10 years. I live in the constituency only for the last 14 years.
Okay, thank you. And Emily?
Hi, my name's Emily Darlington. I'm standing for the Labour Party and I lived in Milton Keynes for about 3 years.
Okay, excellent. Hi, Jenny.
Hello, my name's Jenny. I'm standing on behalf of the Green Party. I currently live in New Bradwell, but have lived in Milton Keynes my whole life.
Okay, thank you. It's going to get confusing because we've got 2 Davids on the end. So, hi, David.
David Mortimer, independent candidate, been in Milton Keynes since 1971.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for coming tonight. Hi, David.
Good evening. I'm UKIP's new parliamentary candidate for the Milton Keynes North constituency. I equally have lived, worked and played in Milton Keynes North my entire life, and it's a pleasure to be standing.
Okay, thank you, David. So what we're doing now is give each party 90 seconds to basically canvass your vote. So that's the way you should vote for their particular parties. So David, we'll start with you. You've got 90 seconds starting now, so stay with you.
Pleasure. Right, well, what I would like to do, and what I've done recently in the hustings in which I've been to, is because I'm new to this position, is to give a little bit of my perspective on things. So to just jump through some of the subjects. So immigration is one in which I believe summary is quality rather than quantity, and have the utmost admiration for the way Australians deal with it. Education, we've spent far too long teaching our children what to think rather than how to think, and turning our backs on grammar schools has probably been the most damaging thing in the past half a century to social mobility. The justice system, somebody will have to point it out to me if it actually exists. I certainly haven't seen it in my lifetime. The National Health Service is very much in the title. It's a national health service, not an international health service, and it says nothing about it being a cosmetic service. Defence is largely, again, in summary, it's better to have it and not. It's better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And the European Union is another fundamental one. It baffles me that we've fought for centuries for political independence from Europe, and now we have stacks full of politicians telling us we're politically dependent on Europe. Every Prime Minister since John Major has gone into Central Europe, met with some Eurocrat, and come back without his wallet, without his trousers, and very often with a red ball backside, and tells us what a fantastic deal he's got. Now, I appreciate I'm by far the youngest on this panel, and you may have cynical views about my wisdom and experience, but I hope that I can compensate that with a willingness to listen, learn, and be enlightened, and I will never compromise reason, fact, and logic for the sake of ideology and populism. Thank you.
David, thank you very much. Hang on time. So that's David from the UKIP, and now we've got David for the Independent Party. Your 90 seconds starts now.
Okay. People need to find out more about me. What people need to do is look on my website, which is UK Family Law Report website. Over the last 20 years, I've campaigned about various issues, mainly to do with family court, social services. So I appreciate that there's problems with all those things. I've also helped set up a charity, Men's Aid in the UK, to help male victims of domestic violence. I've talked to lots of different groups. I was asked to
Okay, David from the Independent Party, thank you very much. Jenny from the Greens.
Hello, thank you. I came to politics in quite a strange way. I felt really disengaged and disenfranchised. I was very frustrated with the system that I was experiencing. So I decided to hold a public meeting and invited lots of people along. Lots of people came, and at that meeting I talked about the things that I saw as being issues. And at that meeting someone told me that my ideas sounded exactly like the Green Party, and I should probably look into them and see what they were doing. So I did, and they were talking about exactly the same things as me, so I joined. And it's been quite a roller coaster, but I believe that one of the biggest problems facing our society is actually inequality. One in 4 children in Milton Keynes is living in poverty, and that's completely unacceptable. We have a large proportion of low-wage jobs. The Green Party would really like to address that, along with many other things. One of the ways we like to do that is introduce a £10 per hour minimum wage by 2020. We'd ban 0-hour contracts. We'd look at making the school system more inclusive, making sure it meets the requirements of the children that are going to it. We'd invest in healthcare, we'd invest in social care, we'd invest in lots of things, and we have lots of ideas about how we're going to fund it as well. So yeah, I look forward to your questions.
Okay, thank you. That's Jenny from the Green Party. This is MKFM live from the Civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council. So now over to Emily for Labour.
Thanks, Darren. I really love Milton Keynes. It has a wonderful combination of the old traditional villages and some pretty amazing new build. Some few mistakes, usually. But the problem I see with Milton Keynes, and the problem that I see that's not being addressed, is the tale of two cities. On the one hand, we are growing faster than London, and that's amazing. But unfortunately, we do have, as Jenny said, too many children growing in poverty, too many 0-hour contracts, and too many families struggling to get by. There are 1,000 food parcels a month now given out at food bank. And that's just not right in a city such as ours. But my real number one priority, as you've seen me campaigning on the last couple of years, is on the NHS and GPs. We have less GPs in the city than we had 5 years ago. And our NHS has had a pretty rough winter. Our hospital has only met 13 times, 9 weeks out of this whole year. And that means it wasn't just a winter crisis, it's been an all-year crisis. And that's made worse because we're having a GP crisis. So we need to see more GPs, we need to see a bigger and expanded hospital. And I believe that the Labour government will help us deliver that, because the NHS is in our blood. But really, one of the reasons I'm standing is because the Westminster politics is broken, and I think that would be part of that solution.
Okay, that's Emily Darlington from Labour. Let's move on to Mark Lancaster, who is who's been the MP for Milton Keynes North for the last 5 years. Hi, Mark.
Good evening.
Okay.
I'm Milton Keynes' greatest fan. I absolutely love the city, and I'm invariably teased when I go down to Westminster about always talking about Milton Keynes. My priority over the last few years has been the NHS. Ever since my daughter was born here at Milton Keynes Hospital nearly 7 years ago, in the middle of a maternity crisis, I decided the one thing I wouldn't be doing was playing party politics with our NHS, and I campaigned hard to get the funding that we needed, and I'm delighted we now have 29 extra midwives as a result. The other thing that struck me was that under the last government, unfortunately, we were viewed as leafy Buckinghamshire, and we were in the bottom 10% when it came to funding for our hospitals. So I campaigned to get the funding formula changed to take account of our growing population. I'm delighted that we've had the 4th highest funding in the United Kingdom, but more needs to be done. That's why I'm backing the plan for a £178 million investment in our hospitals, trying to future-proof it. Already we've managed to get £3 million to our A&E, and we're beginning to see the benefits of that, but more needs to be done. My other priorities are to make sure that our young people have got a home to live in. Our right to buy scheme has been a success here, and with 28,000 homes already having planning permission, we have great scope to build new homes and make sure that we can get people into those homes. And following the principle of I before E, founded 10 years ago, infrastructure before expansion, making sure that we get the infrastructure in place and follow our city motto, where knowledge, design and understanding, we can't go wrong.
Thank you, Mark. And finally, to Sam Crooks, tell us why people should be voting for Leave Dems on May the 7th.
Well, first, Darren, thank you very much for arranging this with MKFM, and thank you also to the audience for coming and for the questions I hope we're going to get. I want to talk about three things in particular. First, the fact, as Emily mentioned, that Parliament is actually broken. Saying March present, I think there's a total disconnect between MPs and the rest of us, as exemplified, for example, over the problems with expenses, the bad behaviour, Prime Minister's questions and so on, and the way in which the parties are always backbiting at each other. The second thing I want to pick out is the differential impact of the recession, the way in which many people were still able to go on getting rich because they weren't being properly taxed, while many others, hundreds of thousands of people, were thrown out of work with their lives and careers wrecked. And thirdly, the word that neither Mark nor Emily will mention tonight, the C word, coalition. They go on talking about an overall majority, but we all know that's the one thing that's not going to happen. I'm happy to be in a coalition, because I believe that a progressive, moderately left of centre party is good for the country. Coalitions actually force people to work together, not in the interest of their party, but in the interest of the country. And that's what we need and want.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. That's Sam Crooks from the Liberal Democrats. Okay, the first topic that we're going to talk about tonight is the money in people's pockets and the local economy. Milton Keynes has obviously been in the papers, in the news time and time again for one of the fastest growing towns, cities. At the same time, we've also got one of the lowest unemployment as well in the country at 1.5%. As some of our candidates have been saying tonight, at the same time, you have got children living below the poverty line here in Milton Keynes. Again, we're one of the areas that is known for that. Also, a lot of zero-hour contracts in Milton Keynes with people earning the minimum wage. So the first question that we're going to raise tonight is that if you become MP for Milton Keynes North, what are you going to be doing about that during the next 5 years? So there's Mark Lancaster, first of all.
Well, I think we have quite a good track record here. I'm very proud that we founded, Ian Stewart, the other former MP, founded the Business and Enterprise Fair here in Milton Keynes 3 years ago. From small meetings and buzzings, we've now grown to having over 100,000 people come to our Business and Enterprise Fair in Milton Hall this year. And we need to do more of the same, because I think the absolute key is jobs. There's a combination really of making sure that people can get into work, because people do want to work, so that they can earn a living. The economy is on the mend. For the first time now, we have inflation almost down to 0%. We've seen that people's wages are beginning to rise above that, so that they are getting more money in their pocket. They are now better off than they were 5 years ago. It's taken 5 years to get there, but we have to keep it moving. And we have to make sure that people do have that opportunity. Equally at the same time, we have taken the personal income tax allowance, we've raised it from £6,000 with an aim to getting to £12,000, already we're over £10,000. That's taking over 1.8 million people out of paying tax altogether, a direct benefit and support for those who are at the lower end of the pay scale. So I think this coalition government has got a good track record actually of supporting people who are the lowest paid. And it's an interesting fact that actually the richest 2% of the society are paying more tax under this government than they did under Labour, whilst the poorest are paying much, much less.
Okay, Mark, thanks for that. Let's go to Emily Darlington from Labour.
I think your question was about how we help the most vulnerable, and you're right to point out that the city has quite a few people that look at you oddly because they think you can suggest it's recovery because they haven't seen any sign of it. The truth is, the Tories and the Dems, they raised taxes 24 times in this Parliament. So they did choose to cut it, and very significantly for people earning over 150,000 a year and for hedge funds. But actually, I think a better way is to cut taxes for 24 million people, which is what they would do. In terms of jobs, what we are seeing is that people are being paid either the minimum wage or they're on zero-hour contracts, and it's very insecure, and there are a lot of people having to go to the food bank at the end of the week because they can't make ends meet. And we shouldn't live in a society where if you are working, you're having to rely on the food bank. That's just not right. I applaud the efforts of the council to try and make Milton Keynes a living wage city, because actually many of the costs in Milton Keynes are much like some of the costs in London. So in fact, the living wage in many respects is more appropriate here. So I would really thought the way they're leading the way. But what we have to do is actually make sure there's good quality jobs being created and that there's opportunity for the young people growing up in Milton Keynes to get those good jobs.
Okay, thanks, Reilly. Let's go to Sam Crooks then from the New Dems.
Well, I would like to expand on the theme of opportunity, because I believe that brings us back to education and what we are actually doing in our schools. And one of the problems I think we have in this area is that the workforce in many ways is not sufficiently skilled to attract some of the firms who would like to come, and therefore they're importing workers from elsewhere. I believe that we have to look at our own schools, our own apprenticeships, and particularly what we offer through the college and the universities that we have locally, in order to enhance their ability to get the jobs that are going to be available. I would add one other thing, and that's the importance of helping with childcare, so that many more skilled women can be enabled to work in a way that at the moment they can't.
Okay, thank you, Sam. This is MKFM with our live election debate from the Civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council for Milton Keynes North. Let's go to Jenny from the Green Party.
Hello, thank you. So it's about quality and quantity, and I'd just like to kind of pull Mark up on something he said. He said that wages are now better than they were previously. They're actually still below 2009 levels when adjusted for inflation. So in real terms, people's wages haven't increased, and we have a much higher percentage of low-paying jobs. The Green Party would introduce a £10 living wage, which would mean people at £10 living wage, which would mean that people are able to live proper lives, would be able to stop having this idea of corporate welfare, where our councils, our benefit system is paying wages of people because their employers aren't paying them enough to live on. Also, we support localism. We think that local businesses should be nurtured and nourished and encouraged, because actually they tend to be much better employers. They enrich the local economy, and that's something we should absolutely be encouraging. And also, Sam Crooks' point about childcare, it's a really important issue that many women and men face. They can't go back to work because they can't afford childcare. The Green Party would provide free childcare from 0 to 7, and at which point we'd start mandatory school.
Okay, thanks, Jenny from the Green Party. Let's go to David then from UKIP.
Now, I promised myself before I took this position any opportunity to pull up this banter you gave between Labour and Conservative about the top rate of tax. I wish to correct. The top rate of tax for almost 13 years under Labour sat at 40%, and it was over the last 3 weeks with an inevitable loss at the end of the election, which pushed up to 50, which if anybody looks at France would know that that's not good. We live now in a country where, just to spite the rich, we will push tax up rather than actually look at what brings in the most revenue. And I can't help but quote Winston Churchill when he said that the best way to put money in people's pockets was not to take it out in the first place. With regards to trades and apprenticeships, again, it comes down to equal opportunity versus equal outcome. And it depends if you want to live in a country where we set draconian targets like sending 50% of people to university, many of which will go and do a Mickey Mouse course instead of a serious degree, come out effectively with a weak degree, a massive debt around their necks, and little to no advance in the workplace. We're obsessed with trying to have everybody come out with the same certificates and the same outcome. I think we need to accept that there are differences and invest in the likes of vocational subjects and trades in the way that we used to. And then maybe we could start to turn away from this obsession with mass migration, which is equally to blame for the compression of wage itself. I'll leave it at that in my time.
Okay, David, that's David from UKIP. Let's go to David from the Independents.
First thing I think that should be changed is the petrol tax, which puts lots of people, basically puts people on the street, that the government's removed the safety net. I think that's a terrible thing for any government to come into power. I think it has the right to remove the safety net and throw people on the street for one. I think that needs to be changed. I can't see how, although these
So let's stay with the Independent Party. Okay, let's talk about housing now then. Obviously Mark's already mentioned the House to Buy scheme. Also several hundred council homes being built, but still people find it very difficult to get a council home or even on the property ladder. So let's go to Emily first of all from Labour.
Yes, I think housing is particularly acute here because actually it breaks the funds when Milton Keynes was first created. When people were encouraged to move here, they said it wouldn't be just a house for yourself, but that your children would be able to own their own home as well. And actually the reality is we're not seeing that. And in fact, we're not seeing that for a few reasons. One, that date back many years, governments and councils have not been building enough housing. I'm really pleased the council has committed to building 200 more council homes. They have been clear that that's just the start. We actually need a lot more, considering that 147 council houses were sold when it was a Tory-led council, and only 13 council homes were built, so we're actually at a real deficit. So Labour's committed to building 200,000 homes, and including within that social and affordable homes. And what we're also doing locally is making sure that when private developers build, that they're building enough social and affordable homes. And when they come back and say, oh, we can't do it, we know actually you got planning permission saying you build 30% affordable homes, you need to stick to that commitment. The last thing I would say is actually what we're also seeing here is a crisis for renters. And what we need to make sure is that we address that with 3-year rental agreements stopping these tenancy fees and actually making sure that good landlords and good renters get a fair deal.
Okay, thank you. That's Emily from Labour. Let's go to Jenny from the Green Party.
Hi, yeah. There's lots of things that we can do. It's a massive problem in Milton Keynes. I'm 29. I've been to university, I've had a good job, and I can't even begin to think about buying a home. People of my age, people younger than me are in a much worse situation. It's something that we have simply got to address, and we've got to address it properly. I think the Green Party are proposing building 500,000 social homes, which is a fantastic start. But we need to be, as Emily said, looking at rental market and what's happening to the rental market. And the sorts of things that the Tories have done in this government to try and help the situation, the 5% deposit that they offered for the mortgages, these things actually make the market worse. They increase the value of houses, which price first-time buyers out of the market even more. So we need to be thinking about building houses, finding ways to stabilise house prices. We also need to be putting rent caps on so that people who are having to rent aren't suffering, and ensuring that the quality of that housing is decent. So many HMOs in this city, and they're not generally very nice places to live. We shouldn't be making people live in this way. We need to be making landlords far more accountable for the quality of housing that they're providing.
That's Jenny from the Green Party. Let's go to David from the Independents.
I believe that the new houses that are being built are going to charge 80% of the market rate, which compared to what the normal sort of council charge, if you like, there's a big difference there. So I think that's actually going to make things more expensive. It's not going to do anything for people on 0-hour contracts or low wages. I think in Milton Keynes South wage is something like that, £17,000. Back in the day, people used to get a mortgage 3.5 times their income. If that's the case, what can you buy for that? Nothing is the answer. So I think now what you've got is a lot of people that are simply cut out of the housing market, but they haven't got a bank and mum and dad. It's virtually impossible then to save up a big enough deposit these days, especially if they're in privately rented accommodation, which I think there was an article in the local citizen, somebody was saying exactly that. I think there's a mother in Hawaii studied from A level, was working, and she said paying private rent, she couldn't actually afford to save up the money for a deposit. So it's a complete nonsense. It seems to be another little housing bubble, which when it does crash, it's going to again affect the whole country. I don't know why local authorities are not buying houses or building houses. I don't know why they use private contractors to do all that.
Thank you, David. That's David from the Independent Party. Party. You're listening to MKFM. This is a live election debate for Milton Keynes North. We're talking about housing at the moment. Let's go to Mark Lancaster, the Conservative.
There is a historic problem with social housing. When social housing was first introduced, the concept was a young family would move in for 4 or 5 years whilst they had the opportunity to save a deposit and then move out and release it for the next generation to move in after them. What's happening now, of course, is people have moved into housing, social housing, and never moved out for reasons beyond their own control. It's all very well for some of my colleagues on the panel to talk about that aspiration to build new houses, but they haven't explained how they'll build new houses. I think the government policy of the Help to Buy has helped people onto the ladder by offering the 5% deposit. Also, the right to buy, I think, is the major step forward, because what it does do by offering a discount, there's a price differential between the market value of the house and actually the build cost of the house. By offering a discount, you then effectively will release the capital, which will be ring-fenced to build new housing. That's how you actually get the money to build this new housing that they want to build. But don't explain how they're going to find the money. And here in Milton Keynes, when we do have 28,000 housing planning permissions already granted, we are the right place to be building new homes. So what we are proposing is a series of schemes, really, which will release that capital to build these new homes, which simply haven't been built by councils for many years.
Emily, you're shaking your head. Let's just have a very quick response.
I think the scheme that Mark's referring to is lays out that they're going to force housing associations to sell off their homes. Now, I completely misunderstand how housing associations actually raise the money to build new social housing. They raise it on the back of the capital, so the actual buildings that they own, forcing them. It's a real market interventionist approach from the Tories, which I'm quite surprised at, because they're always accusing Labour of that. But it doesn't actually make sense. No housing association will tell you that it's going to create more social housing.
Okay, Mark, so a quick reply.
Well, I simply don't agree, on the basis that if the main reason why local authorities have not built houses is they haven't had the capital to do it. By ring-fencing money and making sure that money that's received from house sales is then reinvested into building new homes, that's how you build new affordable homes.
Okay, let's go to Sam Crooks for the Liberal Democrats.
I'd like to go back to the Milton Keynes situation. I do believe we have a developing crisis. If you go back to 2008, the Council's strategic housing needs assessment at that stage said that we needed 3,200 houses to be built per year to keep pace with the demand. In fact, we're building just over 1,000 at the moment. And if you look at our longer term plans, Plan MK as it's called, that figure of 3,200 has been negotiated down to 1,600. So it's all very well for Mark to talk about the planning permissions that are in the pipeline, but they're not actually enough for the growth in the population. And I think nationally that's reflected also. I personally believe we need more houses than the 200,000 that Emily has mentioned, because I think that will keep pace with demand. But we've still got that backlog of non-building that's been going on for a number of years. One of the most effective ways, I think, of helping people onto the housing ladder is through shared ownership. And I would like to see governments take more of an initiative for that, so that the rent that people pay as they get their home gradually goes towards an investment in buying it. And one thing I was very keen on was to see our plan the other day to enable people who are usually living at home to get a loan to put down as a deposit in order to be able to rent a house.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much. Finally, let's go to David at UKIP.
Thank you very much. Now, as a 20-year-old who is fortunate enough to have extremely patient, tolerant parents who, rather than see me throw away my money in rent, they're willing to let me stay and reside with them until I can save up enough for my partner to get a deposit. So I'm most grateful for them. But this is a situation that directly concerns me. I'm not on the property ladder yet, and I've got a long way to go before I get there. If we look at the demand rather than necessarily the supply to start with, there has been an alleged baby boom. The breakup of families now having stepfathers and a solid married household is starting to displace itself over 1 or 2 properties is partially to blame for consumption. And of course, as Nigel Farage said, that seems to go straight over the heads of most others, mass immigration is of course directly to blame. 298,000 people in the past year, that's the net migration figure, came to this country. It's concluded that we need to erect 1 property every 7 minutes to accommodate those kind of numbers. UKIP does look at the demand as much as the supply. And you see, because we're failing to address the demand, that we have to come up with all simple solutions like the so-called bedroom tax as a method to try and put plasters on the wounds, but UKIP proposes policies like supporting decontamination of brownfield sites to try best to preserve the greenery, and we'll also take away the stamp duty of the first 250,000 on those properties.
Okay, that's David talking about housing from UKIP. This is MKFM. Tonight we're here at the Civic offices of Milton Keynes Council having an election debate for Milton Keynes North. So now we're going to talk about education. Obviously a lot of new schools being built in Milton Keynes, schools being extended, but also at the same time very difficult in certain areas of the city to get your children into the school that's on your doorstep. So first of all, let's go to Jenny from the Green Party.
Yeah, schools under investment, I think academies were probably the worst thing that ever happened to education in this country. Trying to expect private investors to run a school that meets the needs of the area it's in without any local authority oversight is just, I don't understand who thought that would work. And the profit motive should have no place in our schools. Our schools are about educating people. They're about ensuring that we are generating, we have a generation coming out of our schools that can go into the workplace and be productive human beings and can add and have wonderful lives and help everyone else have a wonderful life. So as a Green Party, we'd get rid of academy schools, we'd ensure that went back into local authority control so that the growth in schools and the growth in school places could be properly accounted for and could be, they have the information that they need to ensure that this happens. I'm sure David Driver will disagree with me on that one. But yeah, get rid of academy schools, that will solve so many problems, ensure that we've got a sensible joined up school system and ensure it's one that's not working for the profit of the investors, it is working for the benefit of the students.
Okay, let's go to Sam Crooks from the Lib Dems.
Well, on the particular issue of school places, I do actually very much agree with Jenny. One of the difficulties that we have now is that about 50% of our schools are their own admissions authorities. And therefore the old days when the local council could adjust by negotiation catchment areas and so on, doesn't happen now. Which is why people are able, or find themselves piling into one school, while other schools don't have enough their pupils for the places that they have. And so even though we've got some schools that are oversubscribed, we are actually closing a couple of schools. And that's the kind of thing that could have been coped with in the past. The other issue, I think, is the relationship with developers. Because the council will, over a period of time, plan the start dates of certain schools. But if they can't get access to the site in order to actually build that school, because the developer doesn't create the roads or the infrastructure, as Mark said earlier, to allow access to build it, then the school might turn out to be a year late. And as happens in Middleton at the moment, that school is oversubscribed because the school on Oak Grove, which is going to be built, is a year late because Crest Nicholson wouldn't allow access for it to be built. So I do urge the importance of a good working relationship between the local authority and developers.
Okay, let's go to David from Independence.
I think all the time we're in Europe, and people can come here, as I say, from poor EU states, they can just come here to try and better their lives, and that's just going to simply continue to put pressure on schools. Most people tend to live near their school, or if they move, that seems to be one of their household removal journeys. That seems to be one of their main considerations, is making sure they can get their children in the right schools. As I say, an open door policy in Europe, 300
Thank you. That's David for the Independent Party. This is MKFM, a live election debate for Milton Keynes North for the Civic offices here at the Council offices. In association with MK News, we're talking about education at the moment. Let's go to David from the UK.
Right, okay, well, I'm going to take a different tack on this actually. I was employed in the secondary state model for just over 2 years, and one of the things I would like to draw to people's attention, if they're unaware, is let's look at the staff hierarchy in a school. So, you have a head teacher, right, maybe a deputy or assistant, and then teachers and students. No, that was a generation or so ago. Now it's not uncommon. You can have a head teacher, 2 deputies, 3 assistants, heads of houses if you have that structure. They all have assistants, heads of years, heads of key stages, heads of subjects, and heads of sixth forms. I mean, this massive web of bureaucracy costs an absolute fortune, and I promise you, you continue to throw money at it, new jobs will be created within and have a head somewhere in the title. I would again like to come back to grammar schools. As you say, rightfully, David, that if we're to look at where we were on the international tables in terms of education about a generation ago, it wasn't uncommon for us to come first or second. I think we have to look at the correlation as to what's changed to now it's regularly common for us to come 20th. And the absence of grammar schools is certainly one of them. And as I said, emphasised in the beginning, had a massive impact in terms of social mobility. And this draconian university target, which is forcing many people who otherwise aren't particularly interested or are being misled or misguided to go to university, has been an absolute disaster. And I think it will go on a black mark on our education history. Thank you.
Okay, let's go to Emily from Labour.
I think, first I want to pick up what Sam was saying about the problem we had with Milton School and students around that area, and I think that is a significant problem. I've spoken to many of the parents who were extremely disappointed because, of course, now their children are going not even to their neighbouring school, but not even their neighbouring school, they're going much further afield. There's been a significant problem, and we see it in Milton Keynes. One, we don't have enough qualified teachers in our classrooms. There are 109 unqualified teachers teaching in Milton Keynes classrooms right now, just in Milton Keynes North. And that's wrong, because actually teaching a child requires very special skills. It requires understanding those different learning patterns. And actually we are not doing our children or our own future any favours by not having qualified teachers in the classroom. So that's the first thing we need to do. Second thing is, if we have too many students in the classroom, we can't teach them properly. Then it becomes about managing behaviour and not about teaching. So we need to cap classroom sizes. The other thing we need to look at is where students are going. And our college is a great asset to our city. But unfortunately, it's had cut after cut after cut. And it had another £1 million worth of cuts this year. It is going to have to close down courses. And when it closes down courses, that closes off opportunities for our young people, and that's wrong.
That's Emily Darlington then from Labour. Let's go to Lancaster, Conservative.
Well, I'm very proud that over the last 5 years we now have 1 million more children going to good or outstanding schools. And in the last 10 years I have visited every school in Milton Keynes North. And I've worked very closely with the head teachers to ensure we have investment. You only need to look at Boostar and the major investment that's going in there at the moment. When it comes to funding, the Conservative Party are committed to maintaining per pupil funding, as opposed to the Labour Party who are committed to per school funding. It's particularly important in Milton Keynes where we do have a sort of growing population that it should be per pupil, because that way you can ensure that you do have the funds if your school, good schools, can expand. The academy process was of course introduced by the last Labour government, and I'm pleased that this government has continued with that, because I do think academies are very good, and that's why we have contributed to so many more children going to really outstanding schools. I want to say a point there on Ofsted, if I may, which is one of my sort of pet subjects. I do sometimes worry about the culture of fear about an Ofsted inspection. Ofsted should be there to support schools, to ensure that standards are improved. And I'm very concerned that we have such a variety of schools here in Milton Keynes that all too often Ofsted do not measure added value. They simply seem to measure the overall quality at the end. I think added value in many of our schools in Milton Keynes is outstanding.
Okay, Mark, thanks very much. That's Mark Lancaster from Conservative. I believe David, you could...
Keep it brief, yes. One of the things that never actually gets addressed is the character development of the student, the kind of sort of having their minds furnished with beauty, something you see in private and grammar. And at the moment we're in a situation where children really do have all of the rights and none of the responsibilities. fear that there has been a gradual breakdown as well between the relation that parents and teachers used to have. And I just echoing what Mark Lancaster has said as well, that there is an absolute terrifying fear of Ofsted. We try so hard to move the goalposts as possible to avoid their wrath. So.
Okay, David, thanks very much. Would anyone like to respond to David? Okay, that's fine. Right, in the second hour then we're going to be looking at the NHS, GP surgeries and also policing as well. If you want to get questions, you can do that via Twitter. You can tweet at MKFM, you can tweet as well at MK News with the hashtag MK Elections. Also in the second hour we'll be getting some questions from our audience here at the Civic offices here at Milton Keynes Council. A lot of news at 8 fast approaching, we'll be doing that next right here on MKFM.